So what we're looking at today is current events as they're unfolding in the Middle East, especially with Turkey going down into Syria and how that's going to affect possibly the end times revelation scenario in the Bible. The question or concept I've been trying to hammer out is basically this question: is Gog of Ezekiel 38:39 the first seal or White Horseman of Revelation? As you can see in Ezekiel 38:1 through 6, the Son of Man sets his face against Gog in the land of Magog, and he's the chief prince of Meshech and Tubal, and he's going to prophesy against him. Well, both of these places, actually Magog, Meshech, and Tubal, are all in Turkey. Some people say at this line, depending on the version of Bible you're using, that it's the Prince of Rosh. That actually means chief prince, so it's not Russia, but they seem to have a misconception with that. There's a lot of scripture that leads us to believe that it's Turkey. It just doesn't make sense that a Muslim uprising basically is going to be a communist event. So I think Russia will be part of this, but I think it's something that we just sort of have to realize that the real culprit or the person that we have to watch is probably from Turkey, and I'll sort of go through that and explain that as I'm going. As you can see, God actually is going to take a hook, put it in his mouth, grab him by the jaw, and bring him towards Israel because of their inequities against his son, which is basically they don't believe that he is the son of Jesus or of God, that Jesus was just a man or a prophet, and God is going to make them punish them and pay for this indiscretion when they go against Israel. Basically Israel in Gog, Ezekiel 38:39, he will go against Israel. He will subdue and capture Jerusalem. He will take over half the country, and I believe when the Temple Mount is taken or captured, that is when you will actually see the sixth seal break, because there's a huge event where there's an earthquake, and basically we see all the armies of Gog destroyed, and even the lands that have attacked him have hail and brimstone coming down from heaven. So it tells us that you can't have a magic bullet to kill Gog. God's the only one that can do this, and so once he's gone into Israel and plundered that country and Jerusalem, that this is going to happen, and this would break the sixth seal and start the 7-year peace treaty. And actually Gog does die in this event, but we'll get into that as we go. As you can see, he's been pulled towards Israel. They're going into Israel. They're attacking Israel. They're taking over everything. A third of the Israelites run to the mountains, and only one of 3, based on the Bible, of the Israelites or people in Israel at that time, in Jerusalem especially, will survive. So this is going to be a very traumatic thing, and I think I can explain sort of how this is going to go down. As you can see, some of the northern African nations are also involved in this. You've got Sudan, Libya, Egypt. They indicate Persia, Ethiopia also, and then the Gomer and Togarmah is more of the Turkestan up above Turkey, sort of bordering the Russian area, but it's all Turkestan groups. And as you can see, most of these areas on the older maps show that this is all in Turkey. So all these armies, about 10 of them actually, because there's 10 horns on this beast, and it gives them 10 crowns for basically an hour of time. He gives them the authority to go in and have their way, but that's later on, and we'll also talk about that. So why is it Turkey? Why is this so important, and why do I believe this is going to affect us in the near future? Well, you've seen Turkey go down through Syria, and they're starting to really take charge in the Middle East down in Syria, and I believe that is where the Antichrist comes from. I believe that's where the Bible states he comes from. Most people say that if you take the northern parts, scripture passage, that if you draw a straight line up, it goes through Moscow, and so it's Russia and all that. But if you take the polar north, you'll notice that it actually goes through the capital of Turkey. I just don't believe it's Russia. The other thing we do understand is, based on God's word to us, that the seat of Satan is in Pergamus, Turkey. So I would have to think that if he knows that he dwells in Turkey, that that's where he's going to come from. So just a few things to look at, and that's why majority of us, or a lot of this biblical community, believes that the Antichrist comes from Turkey. As you can see in the first book, John has his vision. He writes letters to the churches of their indiscretions and inequities, and basically all of these churches are in Turkey. Now this is a warning to all churches, but these churches that he alludes to are in Turkey themselves. On the 4th chapter, what happens is heaven opens up, and John is actually brought into heaven and placed in a throne. He sees a vision of all these elders that have fallen to the ground. I'm trying to make this short. All the elders have fallen to the ground, and they're weeping because no one has found worthy of opening the 7 seals that have been brought out on the scroll, except for Jesus that comes out as a crucified lamb. He has been found worthy. He will open the 7 seals, and this will start the tribulation period. So you can see he's been handed the scroll. And so what happens is, there are 7 seals, but I'm mainly going to deal with the first 6, and then just allude a little bit to the 7th seal on the end. As you can see, the first seal is the White Horseman. And there's got a lot of similarities to Gog. And this is why I'm asking the question, is Gog the first seal, or the White Horseman of Revelation? And you can see he's got a bow, he goes out and he conquers. He's a conqueror. Now we don't see any arrows, but of course because he has a bow, he's going to basically shoot arrows. So if you look at that, the Lamb opens it, the first seal, White Horseman, he has a bow, he's got a crown, and he goes forth and conquers. Well, we can see that in Gog also, because God tells us that he takes the bow and he smites it out of his hand. Now this is Gog we're talking about. And he causes the bow and the arrows in his hand to fall to the ground. So he's going to destroy Gog. It tells us he's going to destroy Gog. When he goes against the nations of Israel, God destroys and annihilates the armies that go against his nation. They shall fall upon the mountains of Israel, and all the birds and everything will devour them because of the carnage that has happened. He will even set fire onto Magog and some of the countries that go against him. So not only is he going to destroy the armies that are attacking him, which are a horde of 10 nations all at one time, so it's going to be a traumatic event. It's going to be quick. They're just going to pile in. They're not going to have much chance. We're not going to be an effective force, because at that point Turkey's already going to control most of the Middle East, and because God can only kill Gog, and I believe he's Erdogan, the Prime Minister of Turkey, basically we just won't be effective over there, and they'll basically run through Israel, and there's nothing that anyone can really do about this. Once this all happens, Gog basically dies, and now here we have the and that happens actually on the 6th seal when Gog dies. And here we got the 2nd horseman. He's given the power to take peace from the earth, create war. Got the 3rd horseman, which basically is famine and hunger, and starvation upon the planet due to the plagues and wars and things that are going to occur due to Gog going in and creating this havoc on especially the quarter of the planet over in the Middle East. And we will be affected over here, especially on the sixth seal, because that is an earthquake event that the whole world does feel, but we'll talk about that in just a second. He opens the fourth seal, death comes out from all this carnage, and he has basically a pale horse, and death, Hades, and hell follow him. Like I say, depending on the version of Bible you're using, some indicate that it's death, Hades, and hell. In this one, it's just death and hell, but Hades is the individual or being that controls that realm, so I'm guessing he would be in that picture also. As you can see, we have the four horsemen here. We have war, pestilence, famine, and death. Again, Hades and hell follow them. And on the fifth seal, we have the martyrs. Now, these are basically the people that have fought for the testimony of God in tribulation when Gog attacks the Muslim countries over there, subdues the 10 nations, builds his coalition, and I believe he will rebuild the caliphate through the Ottoman Empire, and this will be the driving factor that allow the Muslims to come together and basically go against Israel as a group. So there'll be 10 full nations going against Israel at one time. Also, you have to realize that NATO is, Turkey is the second largest army in NATO, and they're the largest army in the Middle East. So they have a lot of punch, and if we can't pull resources over there, and we've already depleted our resources as it is over there, this is going to be a problem in trying to protect Israel once they get all these nations secured and have that happen. So the martyrs are basically asking, when are you going to avenge us for all this carnage that's happened upon your people, and what are you going to do about it? Well, they're given white robes and told that they must rest and wait for all of them to be fulfilled, all the martyrs, all the elect, all these people to die through the great tribulation and tribulation before he will allow them to have that vengeance or be transformed and taken up with our Lord on the seventh trump. As you can see, the sixth seal is a major event. There's a huge earthquake. The sun becomes black. There's a blood moon event. And I know everybody gets a little touchy on the blood moon thing, but it is a sign. Those are things that you need to watch. Back in 2014, 2015, we had a tetrad. I believe that started a cycle. Usually 2 to 3 years afterwards, something happens to Jews or Israel, and I believe that is going to happen in 2018. We're going to see a lot of potential change in the Middle East, and with Turkey moving in force, I believe that they're basically going to be the main barometer over there that we need to watch. This heaven scroll, heaven departs as a scroll. Every mountain and island is moved from their places, and all the great men, small and large, hide in the rocks and hope that they fall on them, because they know that the Lord is angry with everyone. Now you can see in Ezekiel 38 also, we have a similar event. First of all, you have Gog. He's a similar character to the White Horseman or the first seal. And when he comes against Israel and is destroyed, basically there's a huge earthquake event in the land of Israel. The fish, fowl, beasts of the land, everything is affected. All men on the face of the earth will feel his presence. Same thing as Revelation on the sixth seal. And all the mountains will be thrown down, and basically we'll have pestilence, which is part of what we're going to see when God goes against them. He'll induce a plague upon these people. They will start to fight against each other because they know that they've been mistreated and misled by Gog, and Gog is dead also at this point, because God is in the process of raining down hail and fire and brimstone on them, because God tells us in the sixth seal that he sends the stars down upon the planet to basically kill the armies that have gone against him. So you can see that in Revelation 6, as well as in Ezekiel 38, that there's a lot of common ground to look at here. This is a concept that's never been brought up as far as I can tell. I've Googled it. I've talked to dozens of churches. I've watched hundreds of end days Revelation videos, and this is just a concept that no one's ever brought up before, and I think it's something that needs to be addressed. So this is why I think Ezekiel 38, Gog, is the White Horseman, or the first seal of Revelation. He's got the bow, he's got the crown, he's the prince, or the prime minister of Turkey, so he is the king. I believe, though, that we're going to see another thing happen in the near future that's going to affect this whole situation. I'll explain that in just a minute. The stars fall from the heaven, you have blood moons, you have darkening sun, you have stars and hailstones and brimstone and fire coming from heaven, and it's just a devastating thing, and it will affect us over here. Even though we aren't getting hit with fire from heaven, an earthquake event that's going to affect the whole planet will probably affect our infrastructure over here, and due to that, you're going to have potential, civil riots and hunger and, disease and death and all kinds of different things here. So we've got our own problems to worry about, and I think that's going to be part of the problem as we get kicked out of the Middle East due to Turkey coming through, because God can be the only one to kill him, that we're not going to really be an effective force over there. We're going to come back here, and then we're actually going to get smacked with an earthquake and some other things that are going to affect our own situation here. Now realize in Ezekiel 38, 8 and 12, just as it is when God brings John up to heaven, he tells us that this is all in latter days. It's not in the past. It's not happening when it occurs. You have to look at Ezekiel for the time that he was on the ground and what countries and groups of people were there at that time. Some people want to take the lineage to where these groups finally ended up, but I think you have to look at where Ezekiel was at the time to really get a handle on what he was seeing and what he knew at the time, so that he could write this book. They go against Israel. You'll notice that he ascends and comes down like a storm. Now this is Gog, and you'll note in Gog, if you look at that verbiage in there and the way it's put together, there's a scenario of a goat and a ram, and the goat, which is Turkey, and the ram, which is Persia. The goat will come across from the west to east so quickly that his feet does not touch the ground. He hits the ram, knocks the two horns off the ram, tramples him on the ground, and basically what that's telling us is that Turkey will be such a major factor in the Middle East that it will go against Iran and destroy them. It will absorb whatever it can of that nation, and probably Afghanistan on the other side, and you'll see a huge movement towards the east. And as we said, it comes out of the north. This is Turkey. It comes with many people. It is in latter days, and it does go against his people, or the Jews and the people in Israel. Now, and it also tells us in a number of verses, and he stresses the north parts for a reason, because he wants us to understand that it's Turkey, that this is the seat of Satan, that it is this chief prince of Meshech and Tubal. And he actually, in Ezekiel 38:39, he almost reiterates the three different times throughout these two chapters of this book. So I don't think he'd tell us three times if it wasn't going to happen. The other thing I don't think he would do is not give us all the answers or keys to understanding the end times and Revelation, and to let his people basically be in the dark so they don't know what's going on. And this is why I think if you look at current events, if you look at Turkey, if you look at what's going on in the Middle East, if you look at the seed of Satan, if you look at all these different things, you realize that, wow, we better watch Turkey. It seems to be possibly really happening in front of our eyes. So, like I say, he takes the bow, he knocks it out, he throws the arrows on the ground, and he kills him. Sends fire on him. And what he does? He buries him actually in the northern part of Israel, in the valley of Hamon-Gog. So when the sixth seal breaks and kills all the enemies and destroys all the armies, and it kills Gog himself, and it sets fire upon the different nations that have gone against him, Gog will be buried. He'll be buried in the northern part of Israel. It tells us this in Hamon-Gog. So, all the armies are dead now. Gog's been buried, and we see what? Then, on the end of the sixth seal, we have a half hour of silence. Well, biblically, if you look at that, you take the 1,000 years as one day, and you break that into the Hebrew calendar of 30 or 360 days, because their calendar is only 360 days, not 365. A half an hour would be approximately 7.5 days. And so if you take a half an hour as 7.5 days, and an hour, which is when he gives the 10 heads of the, or 10 horns, the power of the beast for an hour, that means approximately 15 days. I believe that is when two things are going to occur. The half an hour is when they bury Gog. It'll take them about 8 days to put him in the ground. Do that because he is the prime minister, or in this case, he's going to be the new emperor of the Ottoman Empire. So they're going to bury him fairly quickly. And the hour is when the 10 nations run their hordes into Israel and basically go after the Temple Mount, or the main prize, which is God's seat. So that's where the hour things come in. And I don't believe that anyone personally could tell you that themselves. So just realize that that is what's occurring there. You'll notice once Gog's dead and he's been destroyed, then basically 3.5 years after that, that's when we're going to have that situation. So what you're going to see then is basically for 42 months we're going to have the tribulation period after the breaking of the sixth seal, the half an hour of silence, and then Gog's buried, and then we have basically a resurrection of Gog, because one of the things that we're going to see is Gog, as he's being destroyed, we're having also a battle in heaven with Satan. Satan and his enemies are attacking our Lord in heaven, and Michael stands up and throws him out of heaven with the angels that are with him, and they get authority for 42 months, which is the 3.5 year period. Now, I'm not a pre-rapture guy. I can go over that in another topic, but we will be here. People that think they're going to be taken away and this is just for the Jews, or they just aren't going to be affected because it's due to the grace of the church, I'm sorry, that's just not going to happen. God made his people walk through a desert for 40 years, and even Moses didn't get to see the promised land because basically he had messed up, and God said, well, okay, sorry man, you're not going to get to do that. I'm going to send Jacob in. And even Jacob messed up, and that's why they didn't have a ruler when they went into the promised land, and then we had to deal with the judges, and then they fell away from the Lord and basically proclaimed that Jesus wasn't his son, and so the judges basically had to deal with the law issues. There was it was a terrible time for the Jews in general. And this is when Ruth came to be, And if you go into Old Testament, she was actually the Gentile woman that was then given the ability to bring the gospel of Jesus as his son to the Gentile church, and we had the church age occur. But the other thing that's occurring is, if you see, the 70th generation of Israel is going to come up here on May 14th of 2018. They were set up as a nation in May 14th of 1948. You're going to see that 70th generation happen this year. And you know, most of us don't live really past 70. That's sort of the thing. And it's not necessarily a generation within the Bible. There is some passages that will say that, you know, generations are 40, 70, 100, and 120. You know, people can argue back and forth on what those generations mean and all that. Also, I believe the fourth horseman is actually the end of a cycle, because what happens is when you hit the sixth seal, and the fourth horseman is the fourth seal, you're going to see Gog die. Hades and hell is going to come down, and Satan is going to be released and thrown down onto the earth on the sixth trumpet, and you're going to see basically the bottomless pit open and a number of things occur there. I believe that he will come back as the dragon, or Allah. Muslims are not going to follow a communist or a Christian Jesus, so it's just not going to happen. And that's why Gog is so important, because what he will do is he is going to create that Ottoman Empire again. He's going to revive that. This was killed back in World War I, because after the Allies destroyed them, the Middle East was broken up into the countries that we have today, and that's why you see the countries named as they are today and not as they were before, because the Ottoman Empire was basically put out of commission, but they never really died. The Caliphate, the Ottoman Empire, all this stuff has really been sitting out there for a long time. We've heard Erdogan for a number of years state that he's going to revive this Ottoman Empire, and I believe this is going to happen really soon. As you can see, I've got a map here. So what's going to sort of happen is Turkey's going to go down into Syria. They're going to easily go through Iraq, because we depleted our armies there. There's nobody there. They're going to hit Iran with force, and you can see if they take Syria and Iraq, basically to the east, it's all Iran. And once that occurs and they knock Iran down, Afghanistan's probably going to join them. Pakistan's going to have their own issues with India, so they're not going to really care other than protect their borders. They're going to come down, hit Saudi Arabia, maybe mess around with Yemen and Oman a little, come back into Jordan, push down into Egypt, hit Libya, Sudan, and Ethiopia. And then it tells us that basically Gog is going to have a plan to come back towards Israel. That's when he creates his 10 nations and basically goes into Israel, attacks them, takes over half the country, captures Jerusalem, goes to the Temple Mount. We have the sixth seal break, and then we have the half an hour of silence, and then the start of the seventh seal with the seven trumps. Satan would be repregnating Gog, resurrecting him on the sixth trump. That will force basically everyone to wonder about this beast that now has risen from this grave, acting as if he is the risen Allah, so that the Muslims will follow them. And what will happen is we have actually two different beasts happening. We have the beast of the earth and the beast of the sea. The beast of the sea is Erdogan, because he's the prime minister, or the political side, and what you will see is the conversion of the church and the Pope to the other side through the beast of the earth. And so what they'll do is try to take the Christians and the Jews and try to convert them to the Muslim Islamic religion. One thing I think you'll see in the near future is you're going to see Erdogan of Turkey, which I believe is Gog. He's going to secure the tomb of Suleiman Shah, which was one of the Ottoman emperors. This is a site, a tomb that's been moved numerous times closer to the Turkish border, but is Turkish owned in a Syrian country, which I thought was really interesting. And I believe once he does that, that will give him the right to then rebuild the caliphate and consider himself the new Ottoman emperor.